A warm welcome to our viewers and the guests on our panel today who are joining us online and over Rogers Community Television. This program is called Straight Talk, which is a public affairs show which is sponsored by the Midland Cultural Center. And my name is Doug Maund, and I'm the moderator of Straight Talk, which we call a conversation with our community here throughout Simcoe County. Now, usually, Straight Talk is in front of a live audience at the MCC, which gets to interact with our panel. But like so much in the world today, that has changed. The MCC in Midland may be dark for the time being, but we're confident that productions like this one and other community programming are coming back strong very soon in the coming months. So in the meantime, with the excellent production support of Rogers TV using Zoom technology, Straight Talk is coming from the homes and the offices of our guest panel. Now, our topic today is the road back to the new normal, and it could not be more timely. The COVID crisis has impacted virtually every aspect of our lives and the society we live in. But it will end. And there already are encouraging signs that the worst of the pandemic may already be behind us. Optimists like me believe that, and we do hope that it's true. So the fact is, what people do agree on is that businesses and people are going to have to re-engage into our society eventually. So we need to talk about that. Now, we're already seeing some dramatic changes, many of them completely unanticipated 3 months ago. So the question we need to ask is, what will this new world look like after COVID-19? And what changes are we going to see locally here in Simcoe in all of our communities? And we're delighted to be joined by a panel of guests with a wide range of community and professional experience. And I'm really looking forward to their take on these extraordinary times that we live in and the road to the new normal. First, I'd like to introduce Stephen Clark. Stephen is the mayor of Orillia, and he has a lengthy track record. Hey, Steve. Of support for his community in Orillia and throughout the county of Simcoe. Mayor Clark serves on many local committees which are critical to the health and success of the city of Orillia. And he's received many service awards for his work, including the Strengthening Our Community Award from the Chamber of Commerce. Steve and his wife, Chris, are successful small business owners in Orillia, and his roots are here in Simcoe. And as I said before the taping started, if I look over Tiffin Bay, I can see where those roots are, where Steve actually was raised in North Simcoe. Steve brings to this discussion a strong sense of the importance of Main Street to small communities like ours and the changing role of government. So welcome, Mayor Clark. Our second guest is Andy Ott. Andy has a business background of over 37 years in financial services for the Royal Bank of Canada, where he had roles in management and as a financial advisor, both in their Toronto offices and also their branches in Orillia and Midland. And he's well aware of the challenges faced by small business, many of whom were his clients over his many years of experience. And he's also a proud resident of Tay Township, where he serves on a number of local boards and agencies. Glad to have you join us, Andy. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
And our third member is Glen Robitaille, who is the Director of Ethics and Spiritual Care at Waypoint Center for Mental Health Care, where he's been on staff for that institution since 2003. Glen is a registered psychotherapist and a certified clinical multi-faith practitioner with over 30 years of experience in the field of mental health and addiction counseling. He's the author of many papers in his field, and he's taught extensively during a very successful career helping professional in the mental health field. And as so many are struggling to cope with the impact of the COVID-19 crisis on their personal or their emotional lives, Glen brings an important perspective from the front lines. So thank you for joining us, Glen, very much.
Thank you.
So I want to kick this off. And to begin with, I'm going to ask the members of the panel to comment about what they believe and what they see might be the most dramatic change coming out of this pandemic. What really sticks out to them as they see the world now around them? And perhaps, if they're able to, how this has affected them or their families personal in an important way. And I wonder if I could begin with Steve Clark. Steve, do you have any just general thoughts now 2 months into this epidemic?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. That's it's a compelling question. And I think somebody could spend a whole day answering it, but trying to be brief, I think municipally, which is the job I have at the moment, things have changed significantly and probably will in the future. We have been forced to do business differently, and we'll probably continue to examine ways that we can do it differently going forward. Certainly, you alluded to, and I'm very careful in this seat not to wear hats that I shouldn't be wearing. But you're right. I'm involved in 2 small businesses on the main street of Orillia. My wife and I have one we've had for 27 years. Actually, 27 years on Mother's Day. We helped our daughter open one across the street. And the nature of the sector that we're involved in, which is hospitality or restaurant, that certainly is going to be one of the slowest sectors to be brought back to any kind of sense of normalcy. So in short term, the way that sector and other sectors are going to need to deliver products and services is going to have to evolve just to survive. And if it's done right and you've built a competitive edge, I think that you increase your chances of survival. But I don't think that is an equation or a recipe for prosperity. Certainly, and even more on a personal level, we're fortunate enough to have 2 or 3 of our kids live in the community, and our one daughter just gave us another granddaughter, a second granddaughter, a few weeks ago. So she's lovely to admire from a distance, and but I'm sure we will. Anyway, I guess pent-up demand will be make it more special when we do get together finally. I won't spend a lot of time on that. I think I'll just stick to directly answering your question on the municipal front, the business front, and the personal front, and leave it there. I have a number of other points to make, but I think I'll just put those in where it's more appropriate. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Steve. We're going to get into these areas during the discussion, but I appreciate that take very much. Thank you. Andy Ott. Andy, do you have any preliminary thoughts about that question?
Actually, yes, I've got 4 items that I wanted to highlight, and I think we will come back to these during the discussion today, but I did really want to highlight them because they impacted me. The first one is the positive feeling that I'm getting from 3 levels of government working together and cooperating. So municipal, provincial, federal, the kind of programs that have come out over the last little while in these unprecedented times. Some would say, well, how are we going to pay for all this? But right now, this is exactly what's been needed and has been brought forward. And I'm really impressed with what's been offered to this point. The reason I highlight this now is, as we talk about moving forward, is I also believe a lot more support will be needed after some of the restrictions have been loosened up. So not going back to the old normal, but just as restrictions are loosened up, I think more support will be needed. So the positive aspect in this is the cooperation is there and the understanding is there that the support is needed. So that's the first point that really impacts me. Second one is what I'm seeing from local businesses. A lot of local businesses are really focusing in on what they can control. They're not looking at how do I wait for the old normal? They're looking at what can we control. So examples like the pickup and takeout orders for restaurants and businesses that can change and make that an offering or a way of doing business for them, taking control of that aspect. The curbside pickup. So many businesses now, you order online, go to the store, they bring it out to your car. It's terrific. It's another great channel for that business to offer product. The final point I wanted to raise, and something that I don't necessarily have an answer for, but I think will be interesting moving forward, is Simcoe County, actually the whole country, but certainly Simcoe County had a skilled trades issue, not enough skilled trade worker before COVID. So it'll be interesting to see, because there will be some job loss as a result of COVID. Will there be more individuals looking to skilled trades as an opportunity moving forward? In other words, is there an opportunity to bring in more individuals on the skilled trade side because of some of the changes that COVID is bringing about? So those are the 4 items that have really hit me. Chances are we'll touch on more of these, but I did want to highlight these 4.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think we will touch on them. Interesting, when we hear words like herd immunity, to speak to your point, you're thinking, are we the herd that they're talking about that's being told in this way? Who, us? Anyway, thank you so much, Andy. Glen, any preliminary thoughts that you want to share?
Well, the most alarming, concerning thing to me as a mental health professional is the report that over 50% of Canadians are reporting a change in their mental health, with 10% of those reporting severe change to their mental health. The number one predictor of good mental health is resilience. And so what that tells me is that people are encountering a level of stress in this moment that's much more significant than they've experienced in the past. And some of the coping strategies that they've used with, in the past with regularity are letting them down a bit in this moment. There's something that we refer to as demystification that's occurring at a fairly large level, and that's where part of our individual security rests in the fact that there are things that we have been able to count on and believe that bad things happen elsewhere and happen to other people, but they don't necessarily happen to us. And then when they do, it's like that bag that contained all of our securities got wet on the bottom and all came spilling out. And so we're seeing a lot of that. And so I think that people over time are going to be looking at a lot of the things that they've counted on in the past for security and realizing that maybe they're going to have to make some adjustments to the way they thought. And the philosophical changes that change our paradigms are more stressful for us than some of the changes in routine that people seem to be able to roll with a little better than those types of things. So that concerns me. The other thing that really concerned me, and you probably heard this reported on the news as well, is that there's a 400% increase in cities and urban areas of women calling into shelters because of increases in domestic abuse. What was also quite shocking is that in areas like ours, in rural areas, smaller communities, that is the exact opposite that they're encountering, that they're not getting any calls, that virtually nobody's calling in. And they're speculating the reason for that is that, women who are in a difficult situation would rather stand on the measly island on which they are than step out into the void and risk not having any safe place on which to stand. So that's a concern and something that we need to be aware of. I've been encouraging people who know of vulnerable people in the community in relationships like that to check in on them. It's like our government mandated isolation is a license to individuals who have misogynistic personalities in the first place that have always used isolating people from their families and trying to shorten the social circles to their advantage. So those are some of the things that I've been observing from a mental health perspective that are concerning to me and things that we're going to be needing to address as time goes forward. I think the work that will be done on mental health after this is done from a trauma perspective is going to be much more significant than the work that is happening now because people got the nose to the grindstone and they're just doing what they need to do. So those are some of my early thoughts.
Well, that's an area for important discussion that we can perhaps have time to deal with later, because I agree there are some very concerning trends that you read about or hear about since this epidemic has started, which have to be dealt with. Yes, Steve, you got your hand up?
Thank you. Just a comment on a couple of points. One by Glen about what the cooperation from the different levels of the government has looked like, because I quite agree with Glen. It's been certainly unprecedented in recent years. Partisanship seems to have been put aside. And so my only hope is that the level of cooperation that we're seeing between specifically the province of Ontario and the federal government continues. Because we are going to need not just help in the short term, whether it's social programs or whether it's financial, but we're going to need the medium term and long term. And then, of course, the government's going to have to work together to kind of bring down the debt and deficit that is being exacerbated by this. The other point, it's funny because I've been following and with respect to Andy's point about, so I think I've got that backwards anyway, but the women's shelters or the women abuse to domestic violence and women's abuse, because we've been following that. Weekly, we meet with all the senior leadership team in the city, as well as the fire department, the police, Aurelia Power, and with Simcoe Muskoka District Health Unit. And we've been tracking the physical violence or domestic violence against women. And we have not had an uptick in Aurelia, which has pleasantly surprised us all on one hand, but begged the question I think that you alluded to, or somebody alluded to, what does that mean? Is it actual reflection of the situation that there isn't a need for calls for service, or are things being kept behind four walls and not being made public? And I certainly hope that isn't the case. If I could just go back on the government thing for a minute. There's one thing we've done in the city is we've said, okay, the feds are coming out with programs, the province is coming out with programs, and I think they've done a great job to evolve those. I look at the CERB, where some sectors were saying they're having trouble getting people to come back to work, and the federal government expanded that program to allow those recipients to earn up to another $1,000 a month. And even the SEBA, the business loan, which wasn't capturing enough of the small businesses, the SME sector, small and medium-sized enterprises, was expanded to lower the threshold on payroll. So it's including more people. But there are still going to be gaps that I think in particular municipalities and maybe the county to some degree, because they have been, is going to need to step up. And I can expand on that maybe a little further on. But so I think one of the roles of a municipality, whether it's Midland or Penetanguishene or Tiny or Aurelia, is to find out who is falling through those cracks and what we can do to assist. And that may be mental health services provision. It may be some sort of economic help for small business, still being defined, I believe.
You know, Steve, I have been concerned for decades about what I would call the stigmatization of government service on the part of some members of the public. Bureaucrat is sometimes considered, not by me at all, but it's sort of almost an insult, right? And I wonder if one of the changes from this epidemic will be a lack of stigmatization of the government, that people will have a new respect for the fact that the government is the only institution that can help society broadly out of this mess that we're in. I wonder what you think about that. It's a little early, but that's what I'm hearing from people. I haven't heard any objection to these various programs out of Ottawa. That everyone seems to agree it's a good thing. Everyone's cooperating. So any thoughts on that?
Well, with all due respect to people in the profession that Fred Hacker is in, my stepmother worked for Fred for many, many years, but politicians and lawyers were being put into a very similar, on a lighthearted sense, into a certain perspective, which of course is silly. But the politicians have been taking a hit, I think, for the last number of years. There's a rise of populism, which creates a dichotomy in thought. But I will say, data is in from around the world and showing, and certainly from across Canada, that the leaders in those respective jurisdictions are enjoying a popularity now that they haven't enjoyed for quite some time. And I think that's for the reasons you mentioned, Doug. They're stepping up to the table. They're being very visible. They're being responsible. They're providing programs. So it'll be interesting to see how that feeling about their leadership is sustained over the next 6 months to a year. Maybe very well a reflection on the job that we do over the next 6 months or a year.
I think Glen had a comment, and then Andy after that.
I was just going to mention that this whole idea of stigma, which of course is a big concern in mental health as well, mental health not being the only area that experiences stigma, certainly what you've said about politicians rings true as well. Stigma is not something that you can target and reduce. It's like saying we want to stop COVID-19. Well, stopping COVID-19, we probably aren't going to be able to do that, but what we can do is increase our methodology for addressing the impacts of COVID-19. And it's the same with with stigma, you increase awareness. And when you increase awareness, stigma is reduced. So it's the positivistic approach where you control what you can control, which is increasing awareness. What I've noted is that, and I can say it's been true in my own experience, there are politicians that I wouldn't have given the time of day that have just stepped up in ways that have completely shocked me and have increased my awareness around aspects of who they are. So getting to know them at a different level has been very helpful. I would also say there are other politicians that have done the exact opposite for me. Getting to see them as they are has done other things, but I think that's the magic, is giving people information, being a human being, and increasing awareness helps with these things.
All right, and Andy, I think you had a comment?
Yes, I know we didn't want to turn this hour into a conversation on government, so I'll just make one final couple points on this. Well, we can only imagine how tough it is for the Premier and the Prime Minister to every day come out and stand in front of the camera to talk about a topic that really is so incredibly popular. Imagine looking at the public and saying, stay at home, don't go out, close your business down. And this is really tough. But I think the reason the politicians are looking stronger through all this is because this is one great example of the politicians actually listening to businesses, listening to people, what we actually need. Because look at these government programs that have been offered. These are, first of all, these are things that are unprecedented. No government official would have ever even hinted at offering something like this. But because they're listening to what the business needs and the public needs, yes, there are still gaps in this, but overall, this is exactly what's needed along the way. So that's why this is coming across so genuine, is because they're not just making this up on their own. They're getting the input from the public and from business.
So can we use that as a jumping point to talk about Main Street? Because when we talked about this conversation, having a community focus was something we wanted to do. You know, I was been raised in small towns. I lived them all my life. Main Street feels like the heart of our communities. And I have real anxiety about the health of those businesses and how they're going to reboot and survive. So does anyone have any thoughts about how they're going to be able to become viable again and have a business plan that will succeed after this shock to their economic well-being? It's a wordy way to put it, I'm afraid. But anybody have any thoughts? Andy, you wanted to go first, and I think I saw Glen too.
Yeah, certainly. Chances are we're all really looking forward to Steve's answer, because he's the one who's got the businesses, and certainly on the restaurant side, it's been heavily impacted. But the kinds of things that we're seeing local businesses do that are really jumping hold of this is, again, coming back to the comments I made earlier, is what can you control yourself? Certainly the whole COVID-19 aspect is really taking control away from individuals. So you look at what you can control yourself. So looking at other channels of offering, what other things can be offered? As I mentioned earlier, on the curbside pickup, the takeout orders, the delivery, what kinds of things can you, that's the core of your business, but can be delivered in different ways. And I use the example, the farmers again. What a great idea, offering a website so that they can look at the food distribution, because certainly farmers are also impacted if the restaurants aren't ordering from them. How do they move their product? So those are the kinds of things that I really see as positive, is looking at sales channels and what's the core of the business.
Steve, I think it was Steve, not Glen. I'm sorry, Glen. Steve, what hope is there for our Main Street coming out of this? What inspiration can you offer your friends and your colleagues there, that there's a way that we can get back to, in our new normal, something that can work again?
Well, first of all, we're not going to get back to anything that looks really that normal until a few things happen. The European countries, for example, when they open up, they need to look at their epidemiological criteria. In other words, have they indeed flattened the curve? And I think we're demonstrating here that is indeed the case, as long as that continues to be the case. I will remind everybody, though, one of the worst things that can happen is that we experience a second wave. And it's my understanding that from the Spanish flu, for example, it wasn't the first wave of the virus that created the largest amount of mortality. It was the second wave. So we've got to be very cautious, because that could be a death knell We're already going to have businesses that will not be able to open up. We'll already have businesses that will be able to open up and that will not last long because they can't deal with the downturn in sales. But so the first criteria is the epidemiological side. Second one is healthcare capacity, which I think we've seen all of our acute care facilities create over the last couple of months in preparation for the pandemic. So that should allow the aspects of the economy to move forward, and availability of primary care structures in place so that when people are released from the hospital or being maintained at home, that those things are in place. And but the two most important things to getting back to a sense of normal, which is not going to happen in the short term, is large-scale testing that will allow us to identify who has COVID, allow us to have them contained and maybe even track if there's because I know that's part of the investigation the health unit does, and again, to help contain it, but also to use your expression from earlier, Doug, are we at some point going to approach something close to herd immunity, which I believe is 80% of the population having antibodies that will give them some sort of protection against the virus for quite a number of months. But the panacea for getting back to normal, of course, will be to the degree and the speed at which we can get the vaccine into the broad society and have people take up on it. Because until then, yes, there is hope, but that's got to be realistic hope. We will be able to. So the government, as you know, we've gone from, and I love the comment about education because I think that's absolutely key. No matter what you're doing in life or making a decision, or whether you're trying to educate people about COVID virus as individual citizens or as a business. Because we've been taking an educational approach. We can demonstrate that probably a dozen different ways. Then looking for behavior and compliance and warnings if necessary, and enforcement if absolutely necessary. But so that's still going to be the case because our primary consideration right now is still the health and safety of our citizens. But with the province taking measures to open up, which they've demonstrated a lot over the next few days, and I understand tomorrow there's going to be some further announcements. That education is still as important and needs to shift. And as that easing takes place, people are going to feel that we're getting back to a sense of normalcy, but it needs to be tempered with a dose of reality. There's somebody I know very well on the main street, got back into his business on Monday for the first time in a couple of months. And was absolutely, I think he was a little despondent that the streets weren't brimming with people, and therefore, of course, his business wasn't doing the volume that he would like it to do. That's the kind of reality check that we're going to need to make sure that we are taking as individual businesses, and there will be sectors that will be able to come out of this fairly quickly. This is a recession, unlike other recessions. It wasn't, caused by any particular economic issue. It was actually a social or health issue. So how we come out of this, if it wasn't a health issue and it was an economic cause, we could come out of this fairly quickly. But because of the anything that we're going to be doing for the next 6 or 12 months at least is going to involve significant physical distancing. Business is going to be very different. And to whatever degree a municipality can help, a level of government can help, especially the SME sector, I think is going to be absolutely key. I'll be quiet for a few minutes now, Doug.
That's all great. So did somebody else have a comment? I think Glen did, and then I'll get to you, Andy. Thank you.
First, I want to say I think some of the things you said, Steve, were very wise, and I agree with those approaches for sure. In the early 80s, I was bivocational, worked for Birch Business Systems, began selling Apple Computer. I think I sold the first computer that Waypoint ever bought back when it was the Mental Health Center Penetanguishene in the early 80s. So I had a relationship with that medium for many, many years. In 1999, when e-commerce became a thing, I envisioned the idea of counseling occurring online and developed what was then called the Barnabas Network. I had 50 counselors across the United States and Canada offering counseling services. On September 11th, 2001, I actually sold that company to a company in Texas who sold it to United Medical Corporation. You'll recall that during that time, there were people who had vision for the internet, who made business decisions based on this new thing that really made some profound impacts on the economy. NASDAQ as a whole exists pretty much because of technology. I believe that there are going to be people who are going to be looking at the situation and are going to reimagine the way they do business, and they're going to imagine new businesses. And some of those will be in our own local communities who are going to look at the way things are and the way things can be and make shifts and adjustments. So I'm rather excited to see how some of those things happen. I certainly feel concerned for those who have the possibility of losing their business. I have two brothers who have small businesses. And so, I think everyone has someone in their circle of relationships that's probably in that boat. But that's one of the impacts I'm anticipating, is that there are some people who are going to come out of this probably better than before because they're trying to stay ahead of it, and they're stepping back and they're trying to reimagine what business is going to be like going forward, because it's certainly going to be different.
Good thoughts. Andy, you want to comment on that?
Yes, I want to emphasize a point that's been out there for a while, but the power of shop local. If we want stores in our downtown, it is up to the community also to support these local businesses. So certainly smaller communities have been pushing for years to consider shop local, but now it's highlighted as important as ever that if we want these businesses, these restaurants that are around, we need to keep focusing on our community as well.
Well, another point raised by the Premier, in fact, with some passion, is the need for us in some ways to be more self-reliant. He didn't refer to local food, but he certainly talked about masks and ventilators and all of those things. And he doesn't want to have to rely on any sources. And I think there's going to be some pushback towards the globalization model, right? Like we used to be self-reliant, but now we're not because of the way the economy has evolved. I think it's going perhaps the other way. Can I get back to you, Andy?
Yeah.
There's Steve was in there. Yeah.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you for Andy for that comment, because I think you've hit on something key. And again, this isn't all about what we're doing here, but we're truly benchmarking what's going on around the province with our neighbors. We'll beg, steal, and borrow from Midland, for example, if there's a good idea, and certainly in other jurisdictions. But about a week into this state of emergency that we're in Orillia, I asked a member of council, Ted Eamon, who was on this call, is familiar with, to head up an economic recovery task force. And so Andy just reminded me, and they've got 4 initiatives. We put council earmarked $1 million, which was just ratified a few days ago, again, to help identify gaps in some of the other programming coming from the senior levels of government. Number one, to assist the small business sector coming out of this, is we're going to help translate what those government programs mean. Do you qualify? How do you apply? Et cetera, which ones are meaningful for you? And we've got the difference. We've got the Chamber of Commerce involved, our Community Development Corporation, the Downtown Orillia Management Board, and our economic Lake Country Marketing and our Economic Development Department, all involved in this. The second thing they're doing is exactly what Andy was talking about, is the shop local. And that doesn't mean that Orillians aren't going to drive to Midland or Barrie and pick something up. It's not that kind of shop local, but I do believe, and that's tied in with the third initiative they're doing, they're putting a program together to assist the small business sector to have a significant and meaningful online presence. It's amazing how many small businesses we have that have no presence whatsoever online, let alone being able to, even have a communication method or an ordering vehicle. And the fourth thing the program is doing, and the fourth initiative just being launched, is how do we help businesses reopen? What are the protocols? And Doug, I think it was your point. What are the protocols that are required, legislated by the province, and what extra protocols can we put in place that are meaningful and maybe give us a competitive edge? But all those things together hopefully create at least a healthy head start for our businesses. But the shop local one, I think, is key. Again, not because we're competing necessarily with Barrie or Midland, but we are competing with the Amazons type thing online. So if we can move some of that ordering and that commerce to our local level in our relative municipalities, I think that could be a very meaningful step.
I think there's no question retail is going to take a serious hit, but nobody's talked about training. But I think there's a huge role for our community colleges and government to subsidize training of the people in the gig economy who are they're not in great shape coming out of this, and that's a positive if they can get integrated into the sort of things that I think, Steve, you're talking about. I hope so, anyway. Okay, yes, Glen.
I was just going to pick up on what Steve was saying and mention one of the things I've observed with Amazon and with some of the larger online organizations that are making a lot of money right now is that they are not able to deliver in a timely way. You will wait sometimes 30 days or more for an item, whereas if it was locally purchased and delivered, you would get it much more quickly. I think there is a business opportunity in the area of local delivery that can expedite that. That's the one thing that would keep people shopping locally, is they don't have to wait 30 or 35 days. And I don't anticipate if COVID-19 carries on and people remain afraid to actually go into to stores and purchase, that this idea of purchasing online or purchasing by phone or whatever is going to go away anytime soon. So there are opportunities like that if people think to reimagine the way they do their business, and improving local delivery of the goods we sell is one way that can happen.
Okay, Andy, I know you wanted to comment, but I have to wonder. You've counseled hundreds, if not thousands, of clients over your career. I mean, how would you be helping them now, holding their hand to help them through this? Any thoughts?
Well, there's two aspects. One is comes back to whether tough times or good times, is what are your goals? What are you looking to achieve? What are you trying to, what goal are you trying to work towards? In tough times, the goal is maybe it's survival. So maybe it's the comments that I came back on earlier. It's what sales channels, what channels are available to your core business that you can look at. So it's again it's stepping back and looking at what's possible. The other thing is to ask for the help that's out there. There are enough organizations. Steve mentioned several in the Orillia area, Lake Country, Community Development Corporation. In the Midland area, we've got the North Simcoe Economic Development Group. All of those groups are a great source of almost a quarterback of what is out there and where can you look to apply, whether it's on the personal side or certainly they're focused on the business side, but there is the overlap with the personal as well. So those two aspects would be what I come back to, certainly as a banker, is understanding the client's goals. And again, the goal may be really basic now, it's survival. So how do we make that happen? What can you draw on personally more that happen? And then also asking for help. Now, the other part that we're going to come to at some point here is individual savings, where there's an awful lot of RSP withdrawals going on right now to keep things flowing. So that impacts an individual's future as well. If your RSP was meant for your RSP and it's not all going to be there anymore, how does that change what your goals are and how you work forward as well? But I just wanted to go back to one thing you said earlier that I think is an opportunity. Again, for the local focus, but it needs some support. Is there's a reason that PPEs, masks, that they're all made in China. It's cheaper there. So if we want to be more self-sufficient, it's going to need community investment, government investment, whatever it happens to be, in order to produce these here, so they're not a price that's everybody says, let's go back to buying from China. So it's going to need some support to make that happen, because there's a reason it's made in either India or China these days, because it's outright cheaper, and who wants to drive up the price? So it's going to need some support in order to make that happen. But what a great opportunity. Look at how money is being passed around right now, and maybe not as an investment. Here's a way to invest in something that we as a country or even locally are more self-sufficient.
Maybe in the time we have left, we could pivot away from business and Main Street, which is so important to all of us, and talk about the community impact or our society's impact. And I was thinking about this working from home new normal. And even in my own family, we've got one of our sons is in Toronto, and he's in the personal services business, and his wife's a graphic designer, and they're working from home, and they're interested in coming north. And I just wonder if people see the advantages and they can facilitate working at home after talking about it for years and years and years, whether we might see people, increasing our population and all the demands. Maybe that's a question for Steve.
I think you've hit something that is absolutely key. What does commerce or business or service delivery look like going forward? I believe it's going to be different at City Hall. I believe it's going to be different in the small sector and the small business sector. I'm going to, by way of anecdote, I'll tell you a little story that enshrines this. So we have a call center in Orillia called Nordia. I believe about 325 employees. A good employer, pay well, especially in the call sector. And they gave us notice last year that they were going to not renew their lease I believe at the end of August this year. So that was bad news. We were preparing for that. Then COVID hit the Philippines and shut down one of their call centers. And so they all of a sudden needed some of the capacity they had within the system. So they decided to leave it really open, and we're going to renew the lease for periods of time to get them through the COVID issue, and then go back to their previous business plan, which had them amalgamating. So they left the Orillia Center open, pardon me, and then COVID hit our area, as we all know, to the degree that it has, and Nordia was forced, because of the proximity of the workers with each other, to change that. So they are all about 95% of them are now working from home. So all of a sudden, Orillia is not losing those jobs. The Nordia has decided that's going to be their way of doing business going forward. We've lost a tenant, but we'll take care of that. But we were able to retain the jobs in the community, and we do have that fiber presence I was tongue-in-cheek mentioning earlier, which allow us to upload about 950 megabytes per second and download about 1.5 gigs. So that kind of technological or tech presence allows those kinds of things to happen more easily, working from home, for example. The other thing, I'll do this before I sit back for a minute, is you're talking about how it affects our community. So one of the sectors I think significantly impacted during this is the not-for-profit sector. None of them have been able to run their fundraisers or the fundraising activities they do. And even if miraculously all of society was opened up again in September, which it's not going to be, and all these sectors got together and decided to have all their fundraisers, we'd have such a density of them over a short period of time, it just wouldn't work. So I do believe the not-for-profit sector is going to suffer. Going online and looking at the Midland Cultural Center or the website for this particular series, I was looking at the sponsors. And I'm going to tell you that going back to some of those sponsors over the next number of months, 6 months or a year, for sponsorship is going to be very, very difficult. So these kinds of things are going to resonate throughout the community at levels that some of us have begun to contemplate and some of us have not.
All right. Thank you. Yes, Glenn, you had a comment?
I was going to mention there has been some research done on this question of working from home. And there truly are some people who just prefer to work from home and they thrive in that environment. A lot of it has to do with the introversion-extroversion factor, where introverts are more energized by the work they do and extroverts are more energized by whom they're working with. So individuals who work from home really enjoyed it if they happen to be more on that extroversion end of things for a time. But then afterwards, human beings being social creatures, it began to wear on their mental health. So I think probably going forward, I think we're going to see there's going to be a sharing of work from home and a blending of working from home or working in the workplace in many cases. I know here at Waypoint, we have areas where achieving physical distancing is difficult, where we have multiple workstations in a single area, where one of the solutions is those who can work from home. But not everybody wants to do that every day, so they get into some kind of a scheduling and a routine. So I think we may see more sharing of work from home and being in the workplace. in order to maintain that physical or that social contact more. That's important to many people, and most important to all of us. But some people get their primary dose of that from their employment.
Glen, I need to ask you, looking at the social changes that come out of this and how people interact with one another. I mean, this is going to be a big question, so bear with me. We have a situation now where every person we don't know, or even some people we do know, is a potential health threat. Gatherings are restricted or banned outright. And do you see this kind of fear about a very real threat having a long-term impact on how people treat one another and interact? I told you it'd be a big question, but do your best.
Well, my personal feeling on that is that people really don't change too much when it comes to their core temperament or personality. So we see people who, because of these things, are stepping forward, and the altruism and the kindness and the respect for your neighbor is coming out. And then you have others who really are more selfish and more self-centered, who are impatient and entitled, and you can only spill what's in the cup. So if that's what's in a person to begin with, then when things get even more difficult, it's just going to fill that more and spill it more often. So I think we're going to continue to see what we've always seen, that there are people who are easy to get along with and are caring and are respectful of others. And then there are going to be others who feel entitled, who think that they can't wait in line and they're not going to maintain their distance. And some of those people, by the way, I want to point out that Doug Ford called yahoos. Many of them, I think, are probably just extroverted people who are just sick and tired of this and are doing this, what we would call a flight to normalcy. They're just throwing caution to the wind because they want a return to normal because their mental health depends on that. People usually make the decision that for them represents what is best. And while from a common good perspective, what they're doing is dangerous to everyone, from their own perspective and their own mental well-being, they're feeling this is what I need to do because I'm losing it here under the present circumstances. So I'm trying to be gracious with them. I'm trying to be respectful of the fact that this isn't about me and them not being respectful of me. It's about them not being able to resolve their own tensions around these things and probably making decisions that I wouldn't make, trying to be as well as they can. So I don't know if that gets at your question well enough, but that's how I would see it.
Well, Glen, that leads, I know others want to get in, but the other part of that I wanted to raise with you specifically is coping strategies. When I worked in Ottawa a couple of decades ago, I worked with a public servant by the name of Bob Fowler. And you may have heard that name. He was kidnapped by the Al-Qaeda, the Sahara. He was became an ambassador to Africa for development. And he was held for the better part of 5 months under terrible conditions. And he, I noticed last weekend in the Globe and Mail, wrote an article about coping strategies for COVID-19 that he learned from being a hostage, which I found fascinating. He's a wonderful person, and how he survived intact is a miracle. But what he emphasized is trying to limit the negativity after a certain point in the day. And if you see a friend or family member going down that rabbit hole of worry, to do anything you can to pull them back out. So he's no psychotherapist, but I thought it made a lot of sense.
Yeah. Well, first, let me say that I have a workshop called Coping with Loss in Times of Crisis that is available on the Waypoint YouTube site. So it's had about 550 views from Waypoint staff that I'm happy for others to see. It's just one set of 10 approaches that people can use to cope well at a time like this. And there's lots of good material out there. This certainly isn't the only word on it. But what I will say about coping in a very general way that is always true. Anxiety stems from a feeling of loss of control. There is no anxiety a human being can experience that doesn't stem from loss of control. So even anxiety around death is anxiety around the complete and total loss of control. So the one thing that is always helpful is because when we start to feel emotional, we always just want to let it kind of go with our emotions. We give them the power of law. But the best thing we can do is take a step back, say, just because I feel it doesn't make it so, and then identify what we can control. If loss of control causes anxiety, then identifying what we can control and doing that restores some sense of control, which reduces anxiety. That's not what our inclination is to do when we're feeling anxiety. You know, we want to take something, or we want to run from it. We want to avoid it. And avoidance always reinforces the thing of which you're anxious. So that's not a good strategy. I mean, systematic desensitization approaches always tell you you need to experience what is giving you stress to a point where you're no longer stressed by it. And but in a smaller sense, what anyone can do at any moment when they're feeling really overwhelmed and anxious is take a step back and say, just because I feel it doesn't make it so. The world probably isn't going to end. The sky is not falling. This is just emotion. So what can I control right now? And then as soon as you focus on one thing, focus on what you can control, it does help you to gain some sense of mastery in the moment. So that is one application that always is helpful. It, of course, requires the participant to be engaged in it.
And that's wonderful, Glenn. That's going to help me get through my week. I don't mind telling you.
Thank you.
So thank you for that comment. That's great. We're talking to the other panel members about social things, how our communities are going to change. These are big questions, maybe too big to get a handle on, to be fair, but how our communities are going to be changed in, say, 5 years' time. Do you have any thoughts on the big things that you think are going to be different in a couple of years after we get through this thing? Anybody, Andy or
on this one, I would defer to Steve because he's got the big picture of the entire town of Orillia in front of him. So I would defer to Steve on this one.
Any comments, Steve?
The comment is that I'll remember that, Andy. Listen, none of us have a crystal ball, as I think we were alluding to at the beginning of the show. I think we're certainly going to be different for the next probably year. I'm still reading from the medical officers of health that a vaccine could be as much as 18 months out. And I think once you have things in place for 18 months, they probably become part of our normal way of doing life in general, quite frankly. What that looks like specifically in the different sectors remains to be seen. There will probably be different service deliveries. I know as the small, medium enterprises fire back up, they're going to have to deal with the reality that their sales or their volumes are down 50, 60, 70%, maybe 80%. And but they're going to have to kick into this online commerce. They're going to have to do curbside business. So I'm thinking that those things will become part of our commercial landscape probably for years to come. If I could just go back a little wee bit, perspective is so important, whether you have a business or whether you're an individual. And so I really enjoyed Glen's comments on that because I know that people are chomping at the bit, and I've heard daily, I hear from different sectors that are justifying why they should be allowed to be back in some sort of operation or even full operation. And I think every sector could probably make a case for themselves. But the reality is, if we opened everything up right now and listened to all those justifications, we would probably be in a problem situation. As Glen was making his comments, it reminded me of we got some daily. Every time the government opens up something, I hear from less and less people, of course, or less and less sectors. But right now, I'm hearing loudly about boat launches and dog grooming and a couple of others. And some people, I think, are feeling the stress that you're talking about, Doug, and Glen's referencing. And they need to get out and they need to do something to give them that sense of a normal lifestyle. But the perspective I would offer them to maybe take that step back and look at is yes, I know you need to go out in your boat or you need to get your animal groomed, and there's probably very good reasons for both of those. But many people have had their cancer treatments delayed or postponed. They've had surgeries postponed. So I do think presenting perspective in a proper way can help us through this. No, that didn't particularly answer your question at the end.
No, it did, because it's us, we as individuals, and our sense of these things. That's what we're trying to bring out. And I find this fascinating. Look, I knew we just get started and the clock would wind down. We've got about a minute left. Any last thoughts? I'll start with you again, if I can, Mayor Clark.
I'll be very quick. I think, to whatever degree we can, as a municipality, as a business, as a friend, as a relative, is to build confidence in people that they are okay to begin to take part in things, and as long as it's done safely, and they're okay to go into a business that has the proper protocols and PPE in effect. I think to the degree that we can create that confidence will be the degree will dictate the speed at which we come out of this.
Thank you, Steve. Andy, any final thoughts about
Yes.
this situation?
As I mentioned in my earlier comments, and as Glen so eloquently put it, it does come down to control. As we move forward, whatever forward looks like, it still comes down to what can we control, what do we want to make a difference in, what are our own goals, and that's what we'll work towards. And so I thought Glen put it very nicely. Control is certainly the driving force, and that will make the difference. And just one final thing, Glen, I love the line, "You can only spill what's in the cup." What a terrific line. I wrote that one down, Glen. That's a good one.
I'm going to steal that as well. Glen, can we end on a note of wellness? What are your thoughts?
If you're not feeling your old self right now, join the club. That's perfectly normal. I want to encourage everyone to be kind to yourself right now. Don't judge yourself harshly if you're not on your A game. Don Miguel Ruiz, in his the 4 agreements, his last agreement is always do your best. And what I liked about the way he framed it is, your best is not always excellence. You can't control excellence sometimes because much of that is outside of your control. But managing what you can manage is always your best. And right now, maybe our best is just surviving, as Andy put it earlier. And so if that's what you're doing, give yourself a pat on the back for making it through another day.
Well, what a great note to end our discussion on, Glen. Thank you so much. And I want to give my sincere thanks to all 3 of these gentlemen, Mayor Steve Clark, Andy Ott, and Glen Robitaille, for their time and taking part in this discussion. My thanks as well to Rogers for their production of this program, and to producer Ron Clark and Josh Wolf Maxwell in the studio. And also thanks to the Midland Cultural Center and our production committee led by Gord McKay.